Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Bring to you warm greetings from Miami, the home of Florida International University, where we wear our diverse diversity as a badge of honor, starting from our name, the middle name, International, where we feel that we are probably at the leading edge of the phenomenon of the melting of the pot itself. The diversity of our demographics. We are the second largest producer of Hispanic engineers in the country after University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. And also, we are the 8th largest producer of Black engineers as well. So as you can see, we have a variety of different diversity components in our demographics for our students. What I am here today to talk about is a report that we put together as part of two National Science Foundation workshops that we did in 2012 and 2013. But before I do that, I wanted to make a case for diversity, and of course it would be strange to come to a group of people who are here to see how you can surmount barriers for diversity and try to make a case for diversity. But I would argue that the case that we make, it would affect the path that we will take. And the case that we make, as was articulated well earlier, is going to help us reframe our issues, and perhaps that's why it is important for us to understand, and in fact, the thought process that went into the two NSF workshops that we put together on broadening participations. And of course, from the two workshops, I will talk about our proposed goal and action plan that we came up with. So it is very common to talk about the social justice and equity case for diversity. And we would not and should not shy away from that. And in fact, it has been very well articulated by NACME that it's a very simple argument. We would like an engineering workforce that looks just like America. I think that it cannot be any more powerful and simpler than that. But is that enough to be able to frame a case for us that this is what we think should be the reason for us wanting so badly to have a diversity in our engineering student body, to have diversity in our engineering graduates and in the engineering workforce. And as you can see here in the information that is provided by NACME, we definitely are not there. There is another argument that I would like to think about, which is making a business case for engineering, for diversity in engineering, and looking at engineering as the engine for upward mobility in our communities. And in fact, it is very well known that higher education helps with improving the economic conditions of our communities. And given the data that we have with unemployment rates among different groups, from whites, Hispanics, African Americans, and Asian Americans, given even the cyclical unemployment rates that we have had and the fact that unemployment rates in engineering and STEM areas in general are much lower than other fields, it makes sense to argue that for our communities, an investment in engineering would be able to be actually an investment that would have a very high ROI, not only for our communities, but also for the nation as a whole. If we are not convinced, I would plead with you that we need to even consider making a professional case for diversity. We have moved away for some time now about wanting to insist on Made in the USA. And we actually, if I pull out my, not that I have any shares with Apple, but if I pull out my iPhone, you see in the back of it, it doesn't say Made in the US. It says designed in the US. So what we still take pride in is the ingenuity, and is the creativity that we like to think that it still is here in this country. And if we want to, as the president says, out-innovate, out-educate, out-build the rest of the world, and if we look at it as a matter of national security, definitely we need to have a consideration for what is the future of our profession as a whole. And if we start with that, and if we start with the alarming trends of the retiring of the baby boomers and the growing demand for engineers, not only in the technical field, but also in non-technical areas, and look at the supply side, the declining interest in general towards engineering, and in addition to that, the stagnant supply of engineering graduates, and of course, disproportionate interest in engineering among underrepresented minorities, then I think we would be able to make a case for diversity, even for our profession as an engineering. Whether you're a civil engineer, biomedical engineer, electrical engineer, you should be able to make a case for the future of your profession, why it's important to have diversities. And of course, diversity, you can think about it not only as diversity, ethnic diversity, but diversity of ideas. And from that perspective, you can think about, as one said very well, that diversity is a force multiplier of innovation. And I think that is another way of looking at diversity from the professional and from the innovation side. So I would submit to you that diversity should not be looked at just as an affirmative action, but for our profession, for engineering profession, as the only viable action. And I would also argue, and that was a premise of the two workshops that we put together with the support of the National Science Foundation, that the front line of engineering education, to a great extent, has been shifted to those universities and to those institutions that are going to see the demographics of future today. As our president calls it, geography is destiny. And if we fail as those institutions that are seeing the demographics of tomorrow, there may be not a very strong tomorrow. And that's why I would submit to you that it is important for all of us to care what happens at the likes of Florida International University, at the likes of universities such as ours that has the demographics of tomorrow. So I want to thank Dr. Smith, Dr. Maldonado, for supporting the grant that we put together. I want to recognize my co-PI, Dr. Milani from Florida International University, Dean Schopoister from University of Texas, El Paso, and two of my colleagues that are not here today, former Dean Keith Muyong of Cal State LA, and Dean Kilpatrick from University of Notre Dame. I think we did a good twofer. We got funding for one workshop, but we were stingy enough that we made it two back to back. So this was a building partnerships and pathways to address foundational grand challenge for engineering education. We had this in March of 2012. And with the residual funds that were left, we had a follow-up. We extended the dialogue to corporate America. We invited a follow-up conversation to see how we can engage corporate America in what we think that is something that from the professional side, from the business side, they should care deeply. So the first part, or part one of the workshop in March 2012, we invited with 50 stakeholders, and we thought that we do need to care about what happens in the school districts, community colleges, engineering schools, industry, government, and nonprofits such as NACME, HENAC, and others. And we focus on four particular areas. One was developing a systems integration approach for the underserved K-20 STEM ecosystem. We talked about the retention issue in engineering through active engagement of students and faculty. And we talked about how to have university partnerships between HSIs, HBCUs, and MSIs, and the R1 institution to be able to propel the HSI and HBCU institutions towards contributing to the research, because the research is, in fact, what is going to help propel some of those students that yesterday you heard from Dr. Hrbosky about the persistence of some of our graduates in pursuing PhD. So that's why that's important to be able to do that. And of course, industry-university partnerships for engineering. In part 2, which we held this past March, it was extending the dialogue to corporate America, and we concentrated on 3 things: the STEM Corps of Interns, and I will try to explain it in a minute what that is, and innovation ecosystem, and the Peace Corps of Engineers. And both of these reports are available at this website, and if you need my card after the talk, I'd be happy to give you the information on this. And following our workshop, the 4 deans of engineering from FIU, Notre Dame, Cal State, LA, and UTEP, we issued a call to action. Engineering deans set bold targets for broadening participation in engineering education. And we set the goal as part of the outcome of the workshop to increase the percentage of underrepresented minorities graduating with engineering degrees from the current 12.4% that ASEE shows to at least 20% by 2025. We did come up with an action plan. And of course, we all recognize there is no single or simple silver bullet. But we had 5 ideas that I would share with you today. One is to start early, enforce often. We think that the work starts very early in K-5. We need to think about, we always talk about a STEM. We need to think about the 2 middle letters, T and E, and use the T and E to demystify the science and math, and to be able to engage the students early on and integrate engineering into the K-12 education, engage them in an engineering-centric teach or mentor for America to bring folks, retired engineers to school through Engineering Peace Corps in K-12, and through a variety of means, empower the teachers to be able to early on incorporate engineering, and in fact tell the students that this is engineering, as we discussed in one of the sessions yesterday, that sometimes they actually see it, but they don't know it is engineering. They associate it with science, and then they go and don't find it in science, and they get disappointed. And speaking of disappointment, we also talked about encouraging students to come to engineering only to find out the way we teach engineering, or still teach engineering, that it is not exactly what they bargained for. And unfortunately, we still teach engineering, and perhaps there may be other fields that I'm not aware of, as a conveyor belt education system. We move the students from one course to another. We like to give them all their vaccinations of math early on, as a what we call a just in case, because eventually you're going to need it. Even if you don't care to know it now, you're eventually going to need it. And that's why we lose quite a few of our students in the what I call math tunnel before they see the light. And that's why one of the things that we talked about as part of this workshop was that we really need to reform our engineering education. And of course, the trend setting has to be done perhaps nationally at some of the major institutions, but there would be drastic impact on what all of us would have. We need to move towards what we call a just-in-time math to make sure that we have students that are able to appreciate what the math is going to do for them directly in the courses that they will take and with a hands-on. We also focused on experiential and project-based learning. There are quite a bit of examples of it around the country. Success stories, we just need to make sure that those success stories are contagious and they would be able to move all of us towards adopting them. We think that no matter how you cut it and slice it, at the end of the day, it's going to be about the money, and it's not just about the money for the engineering schools or the community colleges or the school districts. We need to finance the vision to become a reality, and financial aid remains one of the most important component of diversity, and that's why we need to make sure that we have systems in place more than what NACME can do or great minds in STEM can do, that would be able to provide the necessary funding for those students that are coming not just from a diverse demographics background, but quite understandably also with limited financial means. And that's why, in fact, I would argue with the statistics that were shown yesterday about how we have so many of our graduates of minorities not pursuing PhD. It is not just because how well they were prepared in their bachelor granting institution. It's because of the fact that they are not able to pursue PhD for financial reasons. And that's why expanding financial aid targeted to engineering majors, it's something that if we think that this is going to be for the benefit of the profession and diversity, again, going back to reframing the question, if you're going to make a case for diversity being the important element of the future of the profession, then we need to think about that and put our money where our mouth is and basically fund the diversity through appropriate means of that. Faculty as role models, we all recognize, and that's why it's so important that it's not just celebrating the diversity of our students, but also replicating it with the diversity of our faculty. And as such, I think it's very important, not just in faculty development and recruitment. We care deeply about how our search and screen committees work as much as the recruiting of the students. And that's why that's important. All of us need to be engaged with that. And as I said at the beginning, empowering the engineering schools at HSI and HBCU institutions would guarantee that we are able to find better ways, better tools that are going to engage minority students, because as I said, we are seeing the demographics of tomorrow. Empowering us would fuel the growth of the engineering profession of tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank you again, and I hope that what we see in this picture would represent what we will see in the future of engineering profession. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nathan Klingbeil. I'm the Dean of Engineering and Computer Science at Wright State University. Since he kind of teed this up for me, I wanted to take 1 second to step on the pulpit about math. My opinion is that the #1 barrier to student success in all of engineering is the inaccessibility of the traditional curriculum, the way we structure the curriculum with Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, differential equations, before you even can take sophomore level engineering classes. And so the comments that were just made about the workshop, I was one of the attendees there, and the idea of application-based just-in-time math, that's the crux of what we're trying to do with our national model for engineering math education. And so what I've already asked Norman to do is to distribute a document that we've prepared as a white paper for the National Action Council on Minorities in Engineering, which they're having their conference here next week here in DC. I've got a plenary panel slot on that where I will present some results that show essentially, the statistic yesterday about 1/3 of all aspiring engineers, right, not minorities, but all students, is all that is ever successful. Okay, I believe that we can do 2 out of 3. Right? And when you look at minorities in engineering, by virtue of the fact that so many students, particularly African-American students from inner city school districts, enter underprepared, the fact that the curriculum as structured is essentially an inaccessible degree path is the reason why we can't graduate people. So the longitudinal data I have shows that we can double the graduation rates of the general population and that we can triple the graduation rates of underrepresented students, okay, by making one first-order change to the curriculum. Okay, so that's my pulpit. I wanted to get that out, and hopefully Norman will send around the document so it's a quick read and give you a sense for what we're trying to do. Okay, oh, great. Hard copies available. Okay.
Okay, so you made a statement early on, and I had me searching for a pen. My name is Bev Watford. I'm from Virginia Tech, which is one of the land grants that you were talking about. And I'm trying to understand, and I'd like a little bit more clarification on your comment about shifting the frontline in engineering education to urban MSIs. I'm not sure I understood exactly what you were trying to get at with that comment.
I think what our workshop was conveying was that if the demographics are shifting as rapidly as we see, and if all universities of all the land-grant universities in the future are going to see the same demographics that we see today, therefore, we feel that we are at the leading edge of working with the minority institutions, minority students. And therefore, if we fail, the future of engineering profession and future of engineering education would be very bleak. And so that was number one reason for that statement. And the second issue is that the urban minority serving institutions are the ones that right now working together with their communities. And that's why in many cases, these institutions would be the ones that are able to work as an anchor institution for their communities. And if you look at the Land Grant Act, you would see that the mission that was communicated back in the 1800s, now that mission or that torch to a great extent is going to be carried in terms of educating the common man from the inner cities and from the communities, depressed communities, by the urban minority serving institutions. And that's why it's important how well they do, and it's important for them to succeed, because otherwise those who will be graduated from those institutions will not be the right people to carry on the torch for the profession.
And I don't disagree necessarily with what you're saying about the importance of the institutions. I would point out a couple of things. One is that it's not just the numbers of students you enroll, it's how those students do. Okay, so just having a large number of underrepresented students does not necessarily make an institution successful in educating those students. And I'm not saying you're not successful. Please don't get me, I'm not implying that at all. I think the second thing is that there are some land grants that are urban and that are serving a large number of underrepresented students and doing that very well. And the third point is that there are land grants that are minority serving institutions. And I think that just the way that statement was phrased, it was kind of like, yeah, you know, we need to put our emphasis here and forget about what the land grants are doing because they need to do what we're doing. And I don't like that us versus them kind of thing. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that I don't support and want to see the success of the urban institutions. But having been at a land-grant institution my entire life, fighting for diversity my entire life, I kind of resent being told you're not the front line. I guess that's what I'm saying.
So I think we acknowledge the fact that many different institutions have these issues. I want to capture a few more questions before we have a break. Emily.
Yeah, my comment or question is similar. I'm Emily Allen from San Jose State University. And during this conference, I've felt like we have failed to acknowledge there may be two very separate issues that we are conflating, because we hear a lot from the more selective universities about diversifying their student body, But then there are the less selective universities whose student bodies are highly diverse. And though they are facing different issues in terms of getting engineers into the workforce. In one case, it's get them in, get them out. In other cases, it takes a long time for our students to graduate. And so we aren't getting as many engineers out as we could. And I think there are different solutions. There are different barriers, there are different solutions, and there are different scales, and there are different financial issues, hugely different, as you pointed out with your financial aid remarks. So I liked your bullet about moving the forefront of engineering education to the minority serving institutions, or at least, you know, having two forefronts, because I think we're facing very different things.
So I'm just going to pick up on that for 1 second. Because
San Jose State was part of the NEE project on 2-year, 4-year engineering technology transfer students. And a colleague of ASCE and myself had a conversation with Emily. I don't think I'm telling you a tale out of school. And if you look at a lot of data sets where they look at who graduates in engineering, 6 years is usually a cutoff with in a lot of places that they do it. So we had this conversation when we were trying to determine how you decide, 30 credits, junior, whatever. And we were talking about the 6 years. And I remember on the phone, Emily's like, 6 years? Our students are working. They're going to school part-time. They're finishing their degree. But part of the problem is the framework we have and the reward system that we have and how we've structured it doesn't acknowledge the fact that many of the lifestyles of many of our students are very different. So I'm not trying to say one's right or wrong, but it's interesting because the framework we often have does not capture the reality of many of our students.
And now I got to go with this side of the room. Time for a couple questions.
I liked your 5 bullets. I think there's a very good mix there of strategies that are in the action plan, strategies that are a little more forward-leaning, but also some that are what I would consider more traditional. So I thought that piece was very well done. Can you talk a little bit, if you can address a little bit about where you see the biggest challenge to those 5?
I think the impediments and the challenges or barriers for each of those would be, let's say for the financial aid issue, obviously it's the funding. So it would have to come from a variety of sources, government and industry. The barrier to transforming engineering education is really us in engineering professions. And I think we look at each other, we look at the trendsetters, we want to see bigger institutions try that and make some changes so that we would be able to adopt it. And the barrier is going to be convincing the faculty that weeding out is not the solution, and we need to be able to understand what is important in our engineering curriculum. When it comes to the issue of the K-12, I think the biggest barrier is the differences that we have from a state to a state, and sometimes even from school district to school district in terms of the criteria that they have and the guidelines that they use, and to be able to have the Common Core and incorporate engineering as part of the Common Core would be probably the most important thing that we need to accomplish. And that, quite frankly, as engineering schools, it's out of our reach. We can only articulate, we cannot make an impact on that. And that's why we thought that this is not something that we as engineering schools would be able to tackle the whole thing. And then I think the issue about the faculty as role models, we need to, as engineering deans and administrators and faculty who sit on the search and screen committees, the biggest barrier is ourselves and the perception, and we have to think about what takes for an individual to become a good faculty in our institution, and that's why we need to definitely adopt the system that allows us to diversify our faculty body. The last thing about the partnership, I think It's, as was said earlier, the book about it's not, I know there's a mistake, but it's not mine, right? Something like that. And I think we're all going to say the same thing. We're looking for partnership between the HSI and HBCU institutions and the major land grant and Research One institutions, and we have to set aside our perceptions and understand that how the world is going to move forward and how to be able to work together. And I think we have to have government as catalyst for those partnerships.
I'm sorry, Henry Frierson, University of Florida. You mentioned the issue regarding financial aid, and that is a barrier for students going to graduate school, particularly PhDs. I'm the dean of the graduate school, and I don't see where getting a PhD should prove to be a financial hardship for a student because of the money. The barrier that I am perceiving is that students are not encouraged to get PhDs. And it's like, well, why would you get a PhD when you can make so much money getting a master's or so much money getting a bachelor's? So the barrier that I see is within. I don't see any serious encouragement on the part of us. And when I say us, I'm talking about across the board. Encourage our underrepresented minority students to consider seriously, educate them about it, and push them, those that have the interest and apparently the aptitude, in other words, they have the inquisitive mind to be successful in PhD programs, and then also support that. So I'm really concerned, and actually I'm pissed off by us as a faculty and administrators are not really encouraging our students to pursue the PhD. And then to throw up the issue about whether it costs too much to get a PhD, students don't have a clue. They don't understand that it's not going to cost you anything, particularly if you're at an appropriate institution.
So we have had a lot of food for thought this morning. Thank you again.